With my recent move, I've been rethinking and redesigning my workspace. You might have noticed like some stuff has been shifting around a lot here. I don't even think this is the final setup, but part of that has been making my workspace work for me instead of me working for it. And part of that has been upgrading the way I do video calls and video podcasts. The key though is having a good camera for these video calls. While Apple may make amazing computers, their webcams that are built into the Macs and the studio displays aren't great. When Opal reached out and wanted to work with me, I was very excited. I've heard a ton of great things about their webcam. And honestly, you could see the difference right away between this, which is recorded on the Opal camera, and the previous clip, which was recorded on the studio display. Opal is a company that is focused around making beautifully designed products. Their philosophy is that we spend way too much time using bad products and they want to fix that. Creators like MKBHD, Casey Neistat, and my friend Sarah Dici have all invested in them. Before we get into the C1, I want to talk about the packaging for a second. This is something I rarely do on this channel because all Apple packaging is pretty much the same and there's really no big surprises to it. But the Opal C1 meets that level of Apple packaging that most other companies just can't. In fact, their packaging, putting the camera aside, just their packaging won an award. In the box, you'll find an Opal C1 camera, a USB-C cable with a coiled side. This is great for making right angles for coming off the back of a monitor. You'll also find a stand and a key for tightening and loosening the screw that's for the stand. There's instructions included on how to put it all together, but it's very straightforward. The Opal C1 was designed by Kenny Sweet. This is the designer behind the first Beats by Dre headphones, the Pixel Watch, and Google Clips. What I love about the Opal C1 is it isn't showy, meaning it doesn't have bright colors. Like I said, it comes in either black or white, and it doesn't have any big logos on it. It fits with your desk setup. It doesn't feel like it's trying to pull the attention away from your aesthetic or be this big bold statement that you have on your desk. At the end of the day, it's just a good looking camera that sits on top of your computer or monitor or whatever. It blends in with your setup. Like I mentioned, the Opal C1 is DSLR camera quality, but in a webcam form. It's extremely good looking footage. The C1 has a 4K sensor and can capture up to 60 frames per second. For software like Zoom though, that's overkill, so it falls back to a very sharp and crisp 1080p. For things like game streaming, you're going to get a very high quality talking head shot or A-roll shot, like this kind of shot right here where I'm just talking into the camera. The lens has an aperture of f1.8, so that means you get buttery smooth background images. Now, for those that don't know, the lower your aperture, the blurrier or the smoother the background is going to be. It's that really cinematic effect that you get. This also means you get better separation between your subject, which would be me in this case, and your background, which would be the wall. For comparison, I shoot all of my talking head A-roll stuff like this at f2.8, so you'll actually get a smoother background with the Opal C1. The Opal C1 is the best webcam I've ever used, not just in design or control, but also the look of the image you are getting. And at the end of the day, that's probably the most important piece. I compared it to the Apple Studio Display webcam, which is similar to the ones that are built into the MacBooks and iMacs. Now, this is the Studio Display camera. Yeah, massive difference, especially you can tell it in the face. Like the face is very smooth, there's no detail. I didn't do any lighting changes. You can tell the white balance is off on the Studio Display. Massive difference between the two here. If you're going to have a desk set up and you're going to do a lot of video calls, you should probably have a tool that works right, because this ain't good. Okay, so this is my test for the comparison between the Opal C1 and the Studio Display, which is very similar to all the cameras that are in Apple's Macs. I honestly can definitely see the difference between the Opal C1 and the Studio Display, especially when you factor in the fact that you have control over the C1, whereas Apple's cameras, you have no control over them. So I think this looks pretty good. With the C1, you get a 4K sensor and an aperture of f1.8. With the MacBook Pro and the Studio display, you're just getting a 1080p camera of an aperture of f2.4. Everything just looks cleaner and nicer with the C1. Now, I've also used my iPhone in the past with both continuity camera and an app called Camo. This allows you to use your iPhone plugged into a Mac or paired with a Mac as your webcam. And it works well, but there's one major issue with it that's just caused me a ton of problems. You're using your iPhone as the camera, you can't use your phone. So if you get a phone call, you need to make a phone call, or something's happening and you need your phone, you can't use it while you're using the webcam. So having that dedicated device, especially if you make a lot of video calls, is just really important. Now, some people may be wondering why I don't just use the mirrorless camera that I use to record these videos as my webcam. Most mirrorless cameras can act as a webcam. That's because I shoot with a Canon camera, and Canon's webcam utility is buggy. It does not work. Most of the time I've tried it, it does not work. It's not great. And Canon actually charges a subscription fee for it now, so it would actually cost me more money in the long run. The C1 is much better for my needs. Also, the Canon utility, if you can get it to work, it maxes out at 1080p. And on top of all of that, even if you can get, put the Canon utility and stuff aside, you're shooting Sony or Panasonic or whatever, you're shooting those other ones. The biggest difference between the Opal C1 and shooting with something like a mirrorless camera is the price. My camera setup that I'm using right now is about $7,000, which is great for, a really cinematic, nice looking camera look, but that is so much overkill for video calls. The Opal C1 is only $250, significantly less than that $7,000. And by the time, if you're doing a video call or Twitch or something like that, and its compression hits those video feeds, whether you're using a mirrorless camera or the Opal C1, people aren't going to be able to tell the difference on the other end. The Opal C1 also has a built-in microphone that you can use for web calls that sounds pretty good. So this right here is me using the Opal C1's mic that's built right into it. I'm not doing anything special as far as audio goes. In fact, this part of the room isn't sound treated at all. It's got metal shelves behind it. It's horrible for audio. But the audio that I'm getting out of this in this position, I think sounds really good, especially compared to what I was getting with the Studio display. I honestly feel if I just had a quick meeting or if somebody just FaceTimed me, I could answer this. I don't need to get out the SM7B or put in my AirPods. I could just have a call just like this. The Opal C1 has some companion software you can use with it. In the software, you can change white balance, color, effects, and more. You do not get these kind of controls with the built-in camera on the MacBooks or Studio displays. One of my favorite features in the software is you can actually go in and change the aperture of the camera. Like I mentioned, it shoots at f1.8, so you get that buttery smooth background. Looks really crisp, really cinematic, looks good. But I spent a lot of time into putting together a nice office, a nice studio, a nice set, whatever you want to call it. So when I do video podcasts and stuff like that, I want to kind of show off that set design. So I actually go in here and I change it to somewhere between f2.8 and f4, kind of just depending on what angle I set up and stuff like that. And that way you can see my background. You can see the stuff that I have behind me, like the lightsabers and keyboards and stuff like that. Also in the Opal software, you can add your own custom graphics. This is great if you want to add your own custom lower third or your website or social media information or something like that to a web call or podcast or something like that. You can also build custom presets here as well. So you can take any graphics you've added or any settings you've changed and make a preset out of that, so it's just one click away. Now, for some reason, when the Opal C1 originally launched, there was some misinformation going around that the companion software that went with it, that you had to pay for that software. It was a subscription. This is not true at all, in no way whatsoever. You can go to Opal's website and just download the software. You don't even need the camera. I mean, it's not going to do you any good without the camera, but just to prove my point, you can just go and download the software. The software is free. Shifting gears a little bit, I really like the stand that comes with the Opal C1. It hooks right on the studio display, never falls off, unlike some other webcams that I've used. It just stays there, does a great job. It also adjusts to fit smaller displays like MacBook displays and the iPad. Now, if you need something a bit different, like you're not sitting at a monitor, or if you have your computer off to the side and you're doing like a video podcast or a video call, and you got like big lights or something set up like I do, you can actually take off the stand of the Opal C1, and the thread that is in the camera is the same thread size as most tripods. So I can just hook it up to any tripod that I have, put it right here on the desk, have this as my background, and then just run the cable over to the Mac Studio. This is one of my favorite details because this means I can put the camera at any height or angle or position I want in my office. I absolutely love the thought of the, like, hey, you know, we have this great stand, but maybe people want to attach it to a tripod. Such a smart idea. With iPadOS 17 coming out later this year, we are getting support for external webcams hooking up to the iPad. And I am extremely happy to report the Opal C1 works right out of the box with the iPad. I just plugged it right in and it recognized it right away. It makes for such a big improvement over the built-in camera, especially if you're using something like the Magic Keyboard. You can kind of see here, but the iPad is down low and the camera is off to the side, and you have to angle it up when using it with the Magic Keyboard. This means the angle that you're getting is not flattering at all to anyone, like it's looking right up your nose. Now with the Opal C1, I can have a video call on my iPad and position the camera in the proper spot without having to go get like a laptop stand or an iPad stand or something like that and then prop it up, and then I can't use the keyboard. I can just use the iPad like I normally would and then have a camera up here. The Opal C1 is better than any webcam I've used. Built-in or external, doesn't matter. It's really nice, and there's a noticeable quality difference between it and all the other cameras I've used. If I'm having a business meeting and I'm trying to sell the fact that I make high quality content and my camera looks like a potato, that's not gonna go over well. This is why the Opal C1 is now a staple in my desk setup. You will just see it sitting on top of that studio display. If you're wanting to up your video call game, or you're doing video podcasts, or if you're wanting to get into streaming games, I highly recommend the Opal C1. Go check it out using the link in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.